Okay, hopefully we do get a couple more people attending, but I'd like to say hello and welcome to today's session. My name's Laura Mondon and I'm one of the trainers here at the Institute of Community Directors Australia. And I'd like to start this session by inviting you to join me in acknowledging First Peoples and their connection to country. In Australia, this connection has been maintained for more than 60,000 years. It exists today and extends into the future. Together, we acknowledge the elders and ancestors of country on which we live and work, and we pay our respects to elders past and present, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples, their ongoing cultures and connections to the land and waters of Australia. So this session this evening is the first of 5 one-hour sessions that we are providing to you. Thanks to Smart Transformation, Nicole and Mitch have supported this program, and Nicole is also on the line. Welcome, Nicole and others. And we will be running these once a week, and hopefully if you've registered to attend this one, you'll also come to the other sessions. My colleague John will also be heading up to Dysart in a number of weeks' time, and we'll be doing a face-to-face session, which I invite you to also be a part of. If you can attend, that would be wonderful. So the session tonight is going to go for about 1 hour, and obviously if at any point you need a break, go and come back. I probably won't know that you've gone, but if you've got any questions throughout the session this evening as well, please do let me know, and I will answer them as best I can. If I can't answer them on the spot, then I'll take them on notice and follow up. So I'm just going to go in the next few slides just talking about hopefully that's clicking forward there, just our panel there, the control panel, which will give you a bit of information about how you can ask questions. I'll leave that up for a second. I'd also like to introduce Grace, who'll be around today to help if you are having any technical issues. While you cannot speak with me today, unfortunately, you do have the opportunity to ask us questions by clicking in the chat box and typing in your question. You can do this at any time. We'll do our best to answer them, like I said, but if I do need to follow up, I will do that as we go. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see me, because I've just lost where my video is, but that's okay, we're all good. Fabulous. Now, just remember that you can download this presentation as well. So you don't need to take notes if you don't wish to, but you can obviously if that's something that you prefer to do. And a reminder, this session is being recorded today, so you'll be able to watch it at a later stage. And if you have committee members that are unable to attend this evening, we'd invite you to pass that along to them so they can also watch it. Okay. Again, if you're having any issues hearing me, hopefully you can let me know and I can get Grace or myself to help you out. I'll just leave this up there. Hopefully everyone's already set. Fabulous. Okay, just also while we're talking about being on a committee, there's certain terms that we'll use that are a bit interchangeable. So I encourage you to just have a quick look at this slide, which hopefully is up. There we go, that's the right one there, wonderful. So within the worlds of management and governance, we use particular terms that mean the same thing and have different names. So to simplify matters, we've created a bit of a list of the commonly used terms. So tonight I'll be mostly using committee member and chair or chairperson, but other organisations use different terms to mean the same thing. So as you can see, so I'm just looking to my right here where I can see the slides. So when we're talking about a committee, we essentially mean the governing body of a community organisation or a group. So that could be a council, you might use the term board, you might use the term board of management or board of directors, committee of management. But essentially it means the same thing. And when we're talking about committee member, which is the word I'll use this evening, we really mean the same thing as a board member, trustee, director, committee member. They're all essentially the same thing. And similarly with chair or chairperson, your organisation might have a president and may use that term instead of chairperson. Chief Executive Officer means somebody that is paid to run the organisation from an operational perspective, but that might also be a managing director or an administrative officer or a head volunteer, depending on how big or small your organisation is. Okay, now I probably will skip over this in the chat unless anyone else wants to introduce themselves. They're very welcome to do so. but I might just skip ahead on to the next slide. Okay, so what we're going to cover this evening, of course, while the session says that we're going to try and make the job of being a committee member easy, we recognise that it's not an easy job, and there's probably no way of us making it super easy, but we're hoping that what we can do is help support you in your work and help you understand your commitment and the responsibility that you're taking on. I'd also like to take this opportunity to say thank you and commend you on your work and supporting your community. It's not an easy job. It's not easy managing the various commitments that we all have with life and family and work. So I hope you find this information useful. So governance, what is it? It's a term we use quite frequently when we're talking about managing organisations. Essentially, good governance is what is crucial to not-for-profits in their ability to function well. It helps them achieve their goals, comply with all of their legal, ethical and operational requirements. And so today's session, we're really asking, what does good governance look like, and how does understanding that help us be better committee members? So what we're going to talk through is a bit about the roles and responsibilities of the board members, committee members, the difference between governance and management and how to tell what the difference is, a little bit about the legal duties as well of being a committee member. And we're also going to talk about the importance of the Constitution. So essentially tonight we're looking at a bit of a short, sharp 101 into good governance and why it's important and what your duties are as committee members. So I'm going to skip to the next slide. Okay, so what is governance? So there's a couple of different definitions. We at the Institute of Community Directors Australia like to say that essentially governance is a systems and processes put in place to steer an organisation's operations and directions. It also stipulates the rights and responsibilities of the committee or the board, the staff and other stakeholders to ensure that overall the organisation can meet its purpose. Governance could also be described as the architecture of decision making. So we do talk a bit tonight about decision making and the importance of having good practices in place to make sure that decisions you're making are recorded and that you're going through an appropriate process to make those decisions. Okay, so I've just got that same quote up there, so I'll skip ahead. Okay, so board responsibilities, committee responsibilities, broadly. There's obviously lots of them, and different organisations will have different things and different ways of doing things that work for their organisation. So these are just sort of the broadly the things that committees need to do. Obviously, they need to, at their centre, have courage and diversity in their leadership because you're leading the organisation. It's a very important role, and like any organisation, the culture, the way the organisation is run, its success is led from the top. And of course, as a committee member, that's you. So you're in charge of making those decisions that affect everybody else that interacts with the organisation. Also, boards and committees are responsible for producing policies that apply to the organisation. They should be looking at renewal and succession. So thinking about the future, as a board member, as a committee member, are you going to be in that organisation? Have you got a long-term plan of 2 or 3 or 5 years? How long is your term of office? It's also thinking about how you can have a plan for working out what will happen when you're leaving the board. If you've succession plan is one of those things that we know people do mean to do and never get around to do, but it is a really important thing to do. Of course, risk management and safety is very essential. You're meeting as a committee, you're making decisions, and you're advocating on behalf of your organisation. So those are really important functions in a very much a nutshell. Of course, there's many things that sit under that, and we will go into detail about some of those in the next few minutes. Okay, so next we're going to look at what this means for committees in terms of the actions and the work that they do. Okay, so what should the committee, what is the difference rather between governance and management? I guess this is one of those things that we often ask people, and it is sometimes a difficult question to answer. I was thinking that we might do this one in the chat, but I think we're going to just plug on ahead with the next one, which is what should the committee do? They should be governing and not managing. So the committee, being the organisation that sits at the top, is working with others in the organisation to set the culture, set the strategic priorities, but they aren't doing the day-to-day operational management. So how do you know where the line is between governance and management? It's a question we often get asked. And often committee members have to wear two hats, particularly with small organisations. We recognise that sometimes as a committee member, you're there at the board table or wherever you're meeting, you're having these meetings about the long-term future of the organisation, you're talking about budgets. And then on the Saturday, you're collecting money for raffle tickets for an event that the organisation is running. It's a very operational task, but you're a volunteer, you're getting involved. And most of the time, you're the board member, the committee member, but some of the time you're collecting the funds for fundraising. And so sometimes that can make things blur a little bit between whether you are in that operational space and doing those little tasks, or whether you've got the hat on of the committee / board member and that you're looking at the strategic future of the organisation. So it's just something to be mindful of. And maybe it's actually about if people came up to you, for example, and you were running a particular event and they want to talk about less operational, more board matters, you might say, actually here today, I'm actually just volunteering at the desk to collect the raffle ticket money. If you want to speak to me about board matters, then we should have a conversation at another time. All right. So in your organisation, depending on how big you are, you might have a CEO, as we mentioned earlier. Different terms are used: managing director, that could be a head volunteer if you're a very small organisation, or a lead admin officer, who's in charge, essentially the person who's in charge of the day-to-day operations of the organisation. This person will work very closely with the committee, and they'll be that conduit, that connector between the staff or the volunteers, or both the staff and the volunteers, and the committee. So as you can see from this slide, hopefully I'll get my cursor over here. So you've got the board or the committee up here, the staff and the volunteers, and generally the information is not going directly to one or the other, but rather through the CEO or that managing director. And just as a side note for organisation, if your organisation rather engages volunteers, and I'm sure many of you do, it's a good idea for them to have a position description that details their role and its limitations. It's really important. It's something that we hear quite often, that volunteers are very enthusiastic, which is wonderful, and they get into a task and there's not really been any discussion with the volunteer perhaps themselves, or maybe other staff that work the organisation. What is the volunteer here to do? What's their role? Obviously, we love our volunteers. They do incredible work and they're giving their time to us for free. So we need to be respectful of that, but also understanding what actually do you want that volunteer to do and what's the limitation. And that also can help ensure their safety as well. Okay, in an example that we use here when talking about, I guess, that separation between the committee or the board and the staff and the CEO, is an example. The committee would not be looking at the petty cash box as a really sort of simple example, because that's a very operational task. That's something you would assume that a staff member would have responsibility for, and they would have a manager, and then that person would eventually, up through the chain of command go to the CEO. The only exception would be if there was, I guess, a suspicion of fraud. And in that case, the whole committee could make that decision to then go into that operational space of checking the cash box. But we are really talking about a very simple example there. But essentially, the board is out, the committee is out of that operational space, and they're really looking at the bigger picture. Okay. One of the ways to think about the separation of the responsibilities between governance and management and where they overlap, and it is really important, I think, and I'm going to call it out because it's something I'm well aware of. There is an overlap. There are going to be areas that are not so clearly delineated between the board's responsibility or the committee's responsibility and that of the staff and the volunteers. And there's some murky water that gets really complicated, but also there's some really important collaborative opportunities where they do have to actually work together. So I'm not saying here that the board and the staff should be working very separately, and the CEO is the only person that staff are allowed to talk to. But I guess we're just trying to make the point that it actually can sometimes cause challenges when it's not clear who's responsible for what. So I guess that's the point we're trying to make. Okay, so as you can see from our triangle here, upside down triangle here, and this is from a company called iClick2Learn, where they've actually identified different areas which have different people responsible for different groups. So governance, of course, as I've mentioned a few times, is about that sort of having that strategic direction, strategic planning, decision making in line with the purpose and values of the organisation. They're also developing the vision and strategies. They might review those periodically as well, and they're setting those strategic plans every 3 to 5 years, depending on their cycle. The committee's also setting the goals and KPIs, or key performance indicators, and these then get handed down to management to actually put into action. So on the next slide, these have been circled. There we go. So you can see that here. And governance should be about asking questions. So we really encourage committees to have to foster a culture of questioning within their committee, because not everybody knows everything. Not everybody's a finance guru. Not everybody knows about governance and meeting procedures. So really encouraging people when they don't know to actually ask questions. There's no stupid questions in the end. It's better for people to have a good understanding if they don't know what the answer is. So things like governance is kind of asking some of those big picture questions like, why are we doing this? Where are we going? Why are we doing it this way? How are we going to get there? So looking at some of those big long-term things that an organisation might want to achieve, governance and the committee are sitting in that space where they're actually making those plans and looking at trying to make them realised. Okay. In small organisations, as I've already touched on, the reality is that there's way more crossover than there would be in a big organisation where there's more staff and there's more tiers of management. But it's still important that there's a line drawn so that everybody feels comfortable and everybody knows where they stand. And this is also to avoid potential conflict or to avoid people being uncertain about their responsibilities, and that applies to staff and to boards and committees as well. And we're going to go into the next part of our upside down triangle. And as you can see on the slide, management, hang on, I'm going to do my next slide here. We've got the little circle a bit there. As illustrated on the slide, management is who implements the plans and activities in the practical day-to-day. So they're the ones who are focused on operations. What are we actually doing? What projects are we implementing? What staff, who are we hiring to work at our organisation? So they take care of that sort of stuff that we'd assume the board would actually not be so involved in. They might be in a smaller organisation, they might be on interview panels and that sort of thing, but they're less likely to be. So management take those goals and key performance indicators that we mentioned earlier. So we've got the strategic plan, the board and the committee have sat down. They might have got a consultant in to help them write that. They've set some big picture goals. They've set some key performance indicators. And then they're now sort of handing it to the staff to say, this is the vision that we have. This is where we'd like to go. Let's now work on how we're going to implement it. And management should be asking questions as well, of course, as the big ones will be, well, what do you want us to do, or what are we going to do? But also, what are the resources that we need or that we have, and how are we going to achieve those strategic goals? Management are getting, I guess, taking that strategic sort of big picture vision and taking it down into the more operational. People might talk about a business plan or an operational plan, but essentially they're taking it to something more tangible for the staff. Okay. Oh, we've got another. This is sorry, next slide. So this is the bit that I mentioned earlier where you're getting some of that overlap. So it's not just the responsibilities of the board or the committee, and it's not just the responsibilities of the staff. So we're kind of in this middle area here where we've got the goals and KPIs and the actions. So here is where your governance and your management are overlapping. And this is where I mentioned we're talking about them collaborating. So they're working together on achieving those things. So governance committee / board have set the goals and strategic priorities. Then you've got, the staff who are getting into the nitty gritty and the operations. And then now we've got this middle bit where they're working together to make decisions. So management should be reporting to the organisation's goals and KPIs to the board or committee on where those KPIs are at. So that's something that they will be doing periodically. The CEO might do that. They might have a CEO's report. There might be a manager's report. Organisations that I've been part of, the CEO asks for feedback from lots of different staff on different projects and has an update that they collate and provide to the board every month. So all of these things, however, should be connected to the organisation's vision and strategies. When setting a strategy for the organisation, it's important for people to collaborate. So that's talking about the governance, the board, the committee, and the management of the organisation, so the staff, because the staff are the ones who are going to tell they've got those operational stories. They're on the ground, they know what's happening, and they can feed that information to the committee who may not have the access to that information in their role as a committee member. So it's really important that they're working together, because the staff can actually test some of that and say, actually, for example, we can't do that because we actually don't have the staff capability, or if we need to hire someone, we actually need 6 months lead time to be able to do that because there's a shortage of staff, that sort of thing. So staff can have that really important operational lens. Okay, now we get to the point where we're talking about the legal duties. So these are the things that both protect the organisation, but also genuine responsibilities that committee members actually do have to follow. So here we're talking about the duty to act bona fide. That's a nice legal term to use. Bona fide essentially means genuinely, without intention to deceive. So really and truly in the best interests of the organisation. So these here have been taken from the Corporations Act. So while there are some differences between corporations, companies and organisations, their legal duties are very similar. So that's why we've used these. And I am going to talk about a couple of these in a little bit more detail in a few slides' time. Okay, so duty to act bona fide. We've also got the duty to exercise powers for a proper purpose, duty to avoid conflicts of interest, and we will talk about those this evening. Avoiding improper use of the position in the company or organisation, use of confidential information, related party transactions, payments to directors. Payments are generally prohibited for not-for-profit directors or board members or committee members. Also the duty of care, skill and diligence, and the duty to prevent trading while insolvent. So I'm going to go through a couple of those. I won't cover all of them tonight given the amount of time we have, but I am going to go through a couple. Okay, so the committee is responsible, has overall responsibility to ensure the organisation meets all its legal requirements. The committee must also ensure that they remain accountable to the members, to the donors, to the funders, to other stakeholders. So there's a lot of people to, I guess, be pleasing and reporting to in various ways that organisations do that. These responsibilities, I guess one of the obvious ones is following the laws of, that apply to that organisation, ensuring the organisation acts according to their purpose, and any tax exemptions that they may receive, finalising, approving and monitoring the annual budget, ensuring auditing requirements are fulfilled, managing risk through risk auditing and mitigation. So in other words, you're responsible. The committee, these are your responsibilities. We won't drill down into more sort of granular detail this evening, but we have lots of information on the ICTA website, and I have got a bunch of links in the last few slides that you can click on and can take you to some really useful resources. Okay, so why do committees meet? Bit of an easy one, but primarily to make decisions. Obviously, there's some elements of it that are about connecting and about giving back to the community, but essentially the function of a committee is to make decisions for the organisation. So when committees make those decisions, it's really important that they, I guess, keep that solidarity, that's the word I've used there, because once a committee has they might have had some discussion about a tricky issue, there might have been some robust discussion and people may have disagreed, that's all fine and very normal. But once there's been a vote and a decision has been made to go a particular way, it's really essential that the committee then moves forward and has solidarity. So they make one decision on behalf of the whole organisation. So, you know, once a decision's been made, even if you weren't 100% comfortable with it, going forward, you are going to protect, I guess, that privacy as well of the board and not say, well, I disagreed and well, I didn't vote for that thing, so it doesn't apply to me. Essentially, you're still on the board. Even if you didn't get your way, you are still responsible for the decisions of that board and you still need to maintain that privacy. And the reason we kind of highlight this is one of the challenges that boards have sometimes is conflict. So it's something we're not shying away from. It does happen, but having that committee, that board solidarity is a really important way of avoiding those issues. Okay. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the Constitution and just some of the laws that give organisations the power to make decisions. So the Constitution is one that I will go into a little bit more detail in a few slides, but essentially that's your set of rules. Every organisation has their own Constitution, or they may be using the model rules, which is I've got a link here. Hopefully I will put that in the end. Hopefully it's in one of the last slides of where you can find the template of the model rules. That's on the Fair Trading website anyway, if you don't already have access to that. But your organisation has to have one of those. That's what guides you. It gives you information about how you're going to go about running the organisation, and I'll go into that in a little bit. Of course, we've also got over here, we've got the Act, which is the Associations and Corporations Act. If you are an incorporated association in Queensland, you've also got, this defines your obligations and obviously can't be changed easily, has to go through Parliament. It's not something your organisation has any control over. Your Constitution, however, is something you can change. There is a process, and that's actually set in the Constitution itself, and I won't go into that in detail this evening, but again, that's something we have lots of information on our website if you are going down the path of changing your Constitution. And then on the far right-hand side of the slide there, you've got the bylaws, the rules, the codes, and the policies. So these are the things that your organisation has. That might be a code of conduct policy, or it might be an OH&S policy, or there's obviously often dozens of different policies that organisations have in place, and these essentially are written by the board. You may obviously use some templates or have some assistance, but the board can change those. Okay. I'll just leave this slide up just for a minute without going into huge detail, but this is just some of the different structures of organisations. And I'm assuming a lot of you who are in the session tonight will be incorporated associations, but you may not. There's obviously different types of organisations that are listed there. Okay. All right. So we're going to get down in some more detail about the Constitution. So a Constitution is established when your organisation files for incorporation, so you have to have it. It's not a optional extra, it's a must-have. And once you've done that with fair trading, for example, in Queensland, that becomes your set of rules and you follow that. So I did mention earlier that there are some organisations that use the model rules. So if you use the model rules, then that's what you follow. If you have your own Constitution, then you follow that. So essentially the Constitution, as I've mentioned, stipulates some rules on how you operate your organisation, how you manage relationships between your members, between committee, between other parts of the organisation. It can also be a bit of a guide on how to run the organisation. It's a really useful legal document, essential to have at every committee meeting. And while it's something people kind of get used to, oh yeah, we know what the quorum is, or we know how to run an election for our committee, it's really important to have it at every committee meeting, just as a reference and a reminder. It's a really useful tool for inducting new board members, new committee members when they come in, because it's something that I guess is a really, hopefully, simple structured document for them to read, but it gives them some of those essential basics that they need to know from the get-go. And I'm just going to look to my right here for a second while I read the slide. It's also a legal requirement. I think I've mentioned that already, so I'll skip over this bit. All right. Okay, so understanding and using your constitution. Everybody has a right to have a copy. It's not a secret document. If anyone tells you that only the president or the chairperson or the treasurer or the governance subcommittee or whatever it might be is allowed to access it, that's simply not true. Everybody on the committee or board has a right to access the document and should have their own copy. The organisation will stipulate things. I mentioned earlier the statement of purpose. The statement of purpose is what your reason for being, your organisation's reason for being, and is really important because that sentence or sentences is really telling everybody who comes to your organisation what you're all about, why you exist. So statement of purpose is in your constitution. It will also stipulate who can be a member of your association and who gets a vote at the AGM, and that is really important when you're running elections, and also to ensure that you have quorum at your AGM. It also stipulates how a committee member can be removed, and hopefully it's something none of you ever need, but in my experience that does happen sometimes, so it's important that committee members understand what that process is. It'll also stipulate a liability clause. It'll also have some information on a process for elections, so it'll actually give you a guide on how to run your elections, and it will have that all-important meetings procedures around quorum. Are you allowed to have proxy? So proxy is giving somebody else on the committee your vote, essentially, to vote on a particular issue if you can't come to a meeting. Some organisations don't allow it, some do, some don't have a limit, which I'm a little bit concerned about. We don't want one board member turning up with 5 proxies, but essentially all that information is included in the constitution. And there's some really good benefits of having a constitution. Obviously you need to have one, so it's a legal requirement, but it also helps, it's kind of one of those public facing documents. So you could have it on your website, and a lot of organisations do, so that other members, your members, can know who you're, what you're all about, but also what their rights are as members. Members of the public might have an interest in your organisation and want to know what your constitution says. It also gives some really clear guidance, so there's less likelihood, hopefully, of people disputing elections, or people maybe saying that the organisation should be doing this or that, where the constitution is kind of your guiding lights, giving you those details. It's also sometimes requested when you apply for grants from government. They sometimes want to see your constitution. It's also, pardon me, I'm just going to have a quick sip of water. Thank you, sorry about that. It's also one of those things that can help you resolve conflicts, and that's because there's usually a process for grievance in the constitution itself. Okay, so what is a constitution not? It's not a strategy plan, so it's not a strategic plan. It's not going to talk about your goals. It's not going to talk about key performance indicators. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to go back a few slides. Where are we? The constitution can be changed at a general meeting of members. So it's something, yes, you can do, but it's not something you can do really simply. So you don't want to have operational things in there. So it's not a strategy plan. It's also not a procedures manual. So it's not going to have a full grievance procedure. It might have elements of it, but it's not going to have sort of the more granular bits of information that should also be in a procedure. So that the policy, the constitution might give you, I guess, the outline, and then the policy itself and the procedure will be taken from the constitution. Your constitution is not going to give you everything you need. It's also not an automatic governance machine. I know people laugh when we say this, But we've talked about what an important piece of information it is. We talked about, I've emphasised quite strongly that it's really important to have your constitution at every meeting. However, your constitution is not going to solve all your governance problems. You can't just put a problem in there and it's just going to spit it out and tell you what to do. So you're still going to have to deal with disputes occasionally. You still have to supervise staff. You still have to lead the committee if you're the chairperson. These things are still going to happen. Also, the constitution is not a guarantee. So yes, there are rules and that's really important. I'm not going to, I guess, discount what an important document it is, because it certainly is, but you're still going to have situations where as a committee you need to sit down and nut things out. So the constitution is not going to consider every single scenario. And even if you have lots of policies in place, that's also going to be the case. Board that I'm on at the moment, for example, has quite a few different policies dealing with grievance, and it's still not going to handle every single scenario. It's just not possible. We've got one more there at the bottom, not a guarantee. Okay. Now, I've mentioned some of those duties, and we've mentioned conflict of interest in passing, but essentially conflict of interest is when a person who is on a committee or a board has an issue in which their family member might benefit, or they themselves might benefit in some way. So conflicts of interest themselves are not legal, they're not a problem. If you have a conflict of interest, it doesn't mean you should be ashamed or embarrassed or resign from the board. A problem with a conflict of interest only occurs, A, when you do not declare them, or how you handle them, or how the committee handles them is really important. So it happens, people have lives, they have businesses, they have family members. So it's really how you handle the conflict of interest that is going to determine, I guess, whether it's an issue with your governance or not. So you have a duty to disclose those conflicts if you have an interest in a particular thing. I'll give some examples in a moment. And it's really one of those things that people get a bit nervous about, because they think if they're in conflict, that they're somehow compromising the organisation, and obviously that doesn't always have to be the case. Okay, so some types of forms of conflict of interest. So self-dealing, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this on another slide, so I might just mention it now. No, just checking. So self-dealing is when the organisation contracts a committee member's private company. So say, for example, I'm on a committee and they are about to change companies for the contractor that comes and does the cleaning for the service. And I also own a cleaning company, which is very handy. So that cleaning company does the work for the committee that I'm on, for the organisation that I'm on the committee for, and I'm the treasurer, so I'm basically signing checks that are coming to me. So self-dealing is a no-no, it's not allowed. Another one there is outside employment. So it's in which the interests of one job might contradict or conflict with another. So that could be an example in a committee, but it could also be if you worked for two different employers. So that might just be in your own working life. So family interests are also could be a form of conflict in which a spouse, child, or other family or other relative is employed, or where goods and services are purchased from a relative. So similar to that example I gave earlier with the cleaning company, the example might be I'm on a committee for a kindergarten, and my sister is a teacher, and we need a new teacher, and she's perfect, and I think she's amazing, and so I want to hire her, and I want the kindergarten to hire her. So it's I guess it's being, declaring that conflict and not being I guess cagey about it. So being honest about it is really important, and we'll talk a little bit about how you might handle a situation like that. So gifts as well from friends who do a business with the person receiving the gifts. Such gifts might include things of value such as transport and lodging. So that's just some examples of conflicts of interest. Okay, so we've talked about the duty to avoid conflicts of interest being one of your legal duties, but we've also mentioned that they are also not insurmountable. You can actually deal with them and still stay on the committee. Okay, so what should you do if you've got a conflict of interest? So in the example perhaps I've given of my sister's a teacher and I work at I'm a committee member at the kindergarten, I would of course declare that and say, look, I think my sister's amazing, I think she'll do a great job. However, I won't be on the interview panel and I won't be part of any of the meetings where that's discussed. I won't help her with her application and I won't use my committee position to get her in the door, so to speak. So you're kind of dealing with it in that way. Doesn't mean that the kindergarten can't hire my sister. It might be awkward if I'm also managing her in a few months' time. However, in terms of the initial conflict of the job application, I would, I guess, remove myself from the situation so that I'm not resigning from the board, but I'm just got nothing to do with that decision. So if you ignore conflicts of interest, individual committee members can be at risk of not meeting their legal duties, and those legal duties, meeting those legal duties is what protects committee members from being taken to court or potential risk to their assets. So it's really important that they follow those at all times. Stakeholders lose confidence in you as a committee member if they think that you're doing things that are maybe a little bit untoward. The reputation of the organisation can suffer. So it's really important that conflicts of interest are dealt with appropriately. Here we have that case study. The cleaning one is on here. So as I mentioned, we've talked about how it can be, we haven't talked about how it can be managed. So maybe it's something I'll quickly cover off. I'm just conscious of time. Conflict of interest, the cleaning case study is that, as we saw earlier, this is a case of self-dealing. So this is someone, I'm the treasurer, it's my cleaning business, and I'm basically signing checks that are also going to come to my bank account, which is definitely a concern. So in this case, you'd be speaking to the treasurer if there was an issue like this on your committee, and you'd be saying, this is possibly something that shouldn't be happening, and that maybe, well, you wouldn't be saying, you'd absolutely be saying it shouldn't be happening and that it should stop immediately. Even if that cleaning company is the cheapest and the best, it's probably not appropriate either to use that company or for the treasurer to be on the committee. So one or the two working together would be difficult and would probably not be a good idea. Okay. I think we've covered the conflict of interest. All right. Board directors and committee members also have legal duties to treat confidential information properly. So this links back to those legal duties that I've mentioned earlier in the session, and that word bona fide, so acting in the best interests of the organisation and not to gain advantage for yourself or for someone else by failing to keep confidentiality. A committee member owes that duty to the organisation even after you leave the committee. So even if you're on the committee for 3 or 4 years, the information that you've had access to during that time should be should remain confidential. So you shouldn't be speaking about it even after you've left. So it is really important also because you'll likely have a policy in place, hopefully around confidentiality. Many organisations will actually ask staff and committee members and also volunteers to sign a confidentiality agreement where they're actually declaring and being really open about it. You need to be maintaining confidentiality at all times, so making it really clear. And I think it's one of those things where people do genuinely often not think they're breaching confidentiality. I don't think people are often doing it in a malicious or deliberate way, but sometimes it's about being careless. You might be speaking to another committee member in the car park after a meeting has happened. You might not realise that the person jogging past is the partner of a staff member, and then hears you talking about that person. Is it, I guess, an extreme example, but one I've come across many times. It might also be you're at the supermarket and you make a comment to a friend and that's overheard. So it's really risky, and I think it's something you need to be mindful of. One of the things that we say is a tip for maintain confidentiality is just not talk about it unless it's not in the public domain, that it's something that basically has to stay private. All right, so we've come to this sort of checklist of, we've talked about the duties today, and we've talked a bit about the legal duties, we've talked about the Constitution, and we've talked about conflict of interest and confidentiality. But also as a board member, you have to maintain duty of care, skill and diligence as well. And I mentioned this culture of questioning. Not everybody's expected to know everything, so it's really important if you don't know that you ask questions, and that's where your duty of care comes in, because you're not expected to know everything. You don't know everything, but you're actually taking the time to gain the skills. You might attend training, you might ask questions. So it's really important. So maintaining appropriate level of skills can be done through the training. So attending sessions like this one, which I hope you found useful. You know, that can be on governance, it can be on management or other topics that are useful for your role as a committee member. It's also making sure that you're up to date with what's happening in the sector that you're working in, that your committee is operating in, and any kind of environmental challenges that might be happening in the, you know, within the sector. So there might be an election happening, or there might be grants coming up, or there might be change of legislation, things that you should be aware of. And you might do that by signing up to receive email alerts from different organisations, ones that provide legislation changes. You might tick particular ones that are relevant to your sector. You might also sign up to newsletters like from government agencies or government departments that send out reminders or send out updates based on particular areas. So you might do that as well. So one of the things you could also do is ask questions of managers that are working at the organisation you're the committee for. So you're looking at things like asking the CEO, asking for reports from the CEO or from managers, so that you've got that oversight. So you're not expected to, as I mentioned, to be in the operations and actually doing the doing, but you are expected to know who is doing the doing and whether they're doing it and whether they're doing it well. So you're also exercising independent judgment at all times. So that's not falling into the trap of groupthink. I don't know if it's a term that you've heard before, but sometimes when we're in a group situation, we don't want to be the voice of dissent and say that you disagree. And so everyone kind of just rolls along with the voice of one or two committee members, and suddenly everybody's thinking the same way and acting on that and making decisions on that, even though they don't necessarily agree. So that's one of those things about, you know, that questioning culture and not sitting back and hanging back when you know you actually should be asking or you should be raising something. Obviously, acting honestly is essential. Ensuring that you have sufficient information. So if you don't have sufficient information in terms of your finance reports, or you've got questions, and you ask questions of the treasurer, of the secretary, or whoever else has that information, it's really important that you do that and that you have the confidence to do that. And one that we've got listed there is don't be afraid to be a stick in the mud when it's appropriate. It is your duty to speak up when something seems off. By being silent and just rolling with, I guess, what's happening, even though you know that it's not quite right, you're still responsible. So as a board member, as a committee member, you're still going to be responsible for those things, whether or not you spoke up at the time or not. And finally, if you don't have the skills, seek expert advice, and committees do this frequently. We get asked advice. We have templates on our website. We have lots of resources, information. There are peak bodies, there are other organisations that can provide support and information to help you do your committee role. I think we've covered this one off, so I'm just going to leave it up there for a second. Just conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes or so left. Okay. Now we've talked about we've talked about confidentiality, conflict of interest. We've talked about some of those general legal duties. One of the other ones that I want to highlight today is that the committee must prevent the organisation from trading while insolvent. Insolvent trading provisions compel committee members to not allow the organisation to trade while insolvent, which essentially means that you keep operating even though you know you can't pay your debts when they're due. And debts just don't have to be bank loans. Debts are incurred every day by an organisation. Every day your staff come in, every day the lights are on, you're incurring debts because there are things that have to be paid for. So you also can't allow the organisation to become insolvent. So when you literally have no money to pay those things that we talked about. So you breach this duty if you dishonestly fail to prevent your organisation from incurring a debt when a reasonable committee member, and we use that word reasonable, when a reasonable committee member would have been aware that there were reasonable grounds to suspect the organisation wasn't able to pay their debts when they fell due. And this is where, again, that culture of questioning, you're not expected to have all the financial nous perhaps of an accountant or the treasurer, but you are obliged to ask questions. So are you getting the financial reports? Are you getting the profit and loss statement? Are you getting the bank statement that tells you exactly how much is in the bank at any one time? Is that information up to date? Is it provided at every meeting? So these are the sorts of things that would tell you if the organisation was in trouble. You would be looking at those numbers, and if there was something off, then you would definitely be asking more questions. It's something you shouldn't be ignoring. Okay. Other legal responsibilities there. I've got a couple of links there that hopefully you'll find useful. I mentioned signing up to receive alerts. So AustLII is the Australian Legal Information Institute, so it has all the information on Acts of Parliament. So you can go in there and actually sign up to get alerts when there's updates to particular acts that might affect your sector. So Not-for-Profit Law is an organisation that provides legal advice to not-for-profit organisations. They are in Victoria, but they are national organisations, so they're based here. But they are, they've got fabulous resources on their website and really, really sort of jargon removed, or the jargon has been removed, so it's really useful. It's something also you may look at getting. They have paid legal advice and support if that's something that your organisation needs. Okay, now I'm just going to touch on this particular topic just for a few moments, and I'm conscious of the time. We've got about another 5 or 6 minutes left for tonight's session. So collaborations and mergers. Your fiduciary duty, we used that word earlier, to do what is best for your organisation. So to make sure that you're acting in best interests of your organisation at all times. Sometimes when an organisation is having difficulty either getting committee members, they might be starting to have some financial difficulty, although I don't recommend people approach mergers in a crisis. However, there might be, I guess, history, perhaps over a period of time, several years, where the organisation is finding it harder and harder to operate. They're finding it hard to get staff, finding it hard to get committee members. Is whether looking at a collaboration or a merger with another organisation is desirable or is a possibility. I'm not going to go into detail about what that involves, but I will. I have put some information in the resources there in the links if you want to take a look at what you might consider if your organisation is thinking of doing, if they're thinking of going down this path. The other thing that some organisations have in place is an auspicing arrangement where generally a bigger organisation takes responsibility for receiving funds on behalf of that organisation and has that legal structure. So a merger doesn't mean that the organisation disappears, but an auspicing arrangement might be something that you could consider. I believe there is a local organisation, Dysart, that is auspiced by another one. So it's something you might want to look at in the future if your organisation is having some difficulty. But as I mentioned, you don't want to wait until you're really in a crisis to look at merging with another not-for-profit or being auspiced. But it is something, if you're concerned about the organisation, that you might have start having a think about. Now, collaboration can be informal, formal, informal, formal, or auspice. I think I've covered that off. Okay. Now, we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left for today's session. I know I've covered a lot of information in a very short period of time, and I hope that's been useful. But I also hope that you come to the other webinars that we are running over the next 4 weeks. And very excitingly, face-to-face session, because of course in the last couple of years we haven't been able to run face-to-face sessions, and our trainers very much are missing that opportunity. So we really do encourage you to come and meet John on the 11th of June. But there's also the sessions on the 12th of May, the 17th, the 3rd and the 2nd, which I encourage you to attend. Again, similar to this one, we'll record them. So if you can't attend, you'll get a copy because you've registered to come to all the sessions. Again, encourage you to tell your colleagues, committees, friends to come along and register to come to our session. That would be wonderful. And we really look forward to seeing you at those sessions. And here is a list of some of the resources that I've mentioned, some of the ones that the Institute of Community Directors has on our website. And so there's this this Policy Bank one on our website. There's literally dozens of policies there, templates that hopefully your committee, if you don't have particular policies in place, you will find just about everything there. Also some tools and resources. I believe on the control panel as well, you can download both the slides of this session, but also a copy of, I'm just having a quick look here. We've got our decision-making checklist, which can be helpful, a template agenda and minutes, but I will also be covering those topics at the session next week, which is on running effective meetings. Really practical advice in that session, hopefully to help your meetings run smoother. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's session and the information we've provided. I hope you find the links useful, and I just want to say a very big thank you for your attendance. And as always, we invite you to give your feedback. You'll get an email in the next couple of days with a link that's got a quick survey on there that I really would, hopefully you can fill that in. That would be wonderful. Please take the time, because we do actually use the feedback to improve our offerings for community organisations. This is actually what we do. This is our bread and butter here at the Institute of Community Directors. We love supporting boards and committees. We're very passionate about it. So anything we can do to help improve your experience is very much appreciated if you can provide that feedback. But for this evening, that is all we have, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session. See ya.